Let's learn how to draw line art using pen tool. In this lesson, I will share with you 3 simple steps. And if you can follow these steps, you will be able to draw almost anything with ease. But before we start, let me introduce to you a new tool. The width tool is a tool that allows us to adjust the thickness of our stroke very freely. So all you have to do is press Shift W to select width tool and put your cursor on top of the stroke and left click to increase the size. And you can add additional points to decrease the size. So at the end of the point here, I want to make it sharp. I can easily push it to make it a sharp point like this. To delete the points, press Shift W and left click on the white dots. The white dots are the indicators of the width tool. So you can left click and press delete and it will remove the width tool. At the top panel over here, we have a variable width profile. So these profile are the templates of the different shape of the stroke that you can use. So personally, I always use width profile number 1 and number 5. So to use this template, all you have to do is select your stroke and left click. The reason why I love to use the width profile number 1 is that it allows me to easily create hairlines, which is very useful for us to draw details in our drawing later. And before we start our drawing, there's one setting that I want you guys to set. Go to Window menu, bring out the Appearance panel, and click on the hamburger menu icon. And make sure you untick the New Art has Basic Appearance. The reason why is, when I draw a custom line, for example a line like this, unticking that option allows me to continue drawing a line with the same shape. If I tick that option, every new line that I draw will be a default line like this. And it will take up a lot of time for me to change the width and also the width profile over and over again. Alright, step number 1. We want to draw out the main shape of the apple as detailed as possible. And it's a best practice to always separate the parts clearly so that you don't draw it like this. Alright, so draw it separately. So if you're drawing the main body, then make sure that you draw the entire main body like this. And the stem, we draw it separately like this. And the smaller parts of the apple, we also draw it separately like this. And the reason why is because if we draw it separate like this, it's a lot easier for us to adjust the thickness of each part of the line. And that's it for step number 1. So let's move on to step number 2. In step number 2, we want to use width tool to change the thickness of our stroke. We want to create the illusion of depth. So whichever parts that look closer to the camera, we want to make the line look thicker. And whichever part that looks further away from the camera, we want to make it thinner. This way, we will be able to create the illusion of depth. So for this apple, we can see there's a little bit of depth over here. So what I want to do now is to select my shape, press Shift W, and increase the thickness of both sides over here. Having a thickness like this will help us improve the silhouette of our shape. Now let's do the same for this part. So for this part of the stem, we have to decide which part should be thicker and which part should be thinner. So this is totally up to our own judgment. So for me personally, I feel that I can see more of this part here of the stem. So I would want to make this part to be thicker. So again, Shift W, hold on left click and drag to make this part thicker than the other side. And I'll repeat the same thing with all this part. And then I'll fill my shape with white color so that I can place whichever layer that is supposed to be in front. I can rearrange them accordingly in the layer panel or by using arrange. And for the next step, before I move to the step number 3, I would want to capture these lines here as well. So these are considered as the main outline as well because it forms the entire shape of the apple. So what you can do is you can add a separate line like this onto the apple. So I'm just going to reuse this line here very quickly. And for this part, the line seems to be going all the way to the back. So I will want to take my width tool To make this part thinner again, I can add a stop over here. I can create a point over here to create a stop like this. Alright, and now we have done step 1 and step 2. And step number 3 is the part where we need to analyze the details. So the things that I consider as the details are the shape, the 3D shape, the form, and the texture, or the thickness. So for example, on this image, we can see that there are lines on the apple, there are some texture, some lines of this stem. We know that this stem is a cylinder shape, and the body of this apple has a very rough surface. So all these lines are the details that we want to capture. And we also can see the skin, which has some sort of a thickness. And then we also have the seeds where we can repeat the step number 1, step number 2 again. And we also have this color shape over here. So for step number 3, our job is to simplify all the lines and details that we can see into a line art. Bear in mind, sometimes it's very difficult to draw everything exactly as we see because a real image has color to show us a lot of information. But in a black and white line art like this, we are limited to only having black and white and simple lines. So we have to utilize fully on the thickness of the lines, the shape of the lines to help us visualize the 3D shape and the texture in our object. So for the details, as you can see over here, to show that this stem has a cylindrical shape, I use a small curved line like this to show the direction of how the line curves. Similar to this one here, I use a simple line to draw out the path on how the apple will curve down to its core. And to show the texture of the apple, which has a rough texture, we can use lines that looks like this. C shape, simple half circle, simple lines like this. So these are the bunch of lines and curves that I find very useful to show the texture of any object that has a rough surface, uneven surface, or even a crunchy surface. So if you are drawing a crunchy surface, like maybe a biscuit or something, then you can make the line curvier to show the uneven surface of the texture. And then for this part here, sometimes when we try to draw the entire shape, it's very hard to tell what kind of shape is this. As you can see, this part, the color is quite thick, and as it goes down, the color disappears, it becomes lighter, and we can barely see the shape or the line. So if we try to draw the lines that we can barely see, usually we will end up drawing a very, very weird shape. So what I like to do in this kind of situation is to just draft out the lines halfway, like this. Don't try to draw out the entire thing, because if you try to draw out the whole shape, you will end up with a very weird looking shape. So let's say I want to try to capture the entire shape like this. I'm just drawing it as an example, so it will be very rough. So at the end, this will be a very weird shape. It's a very distracting shape. So remember to always simplify the lines or details that is hard to see. And after you have done capturing all the little details, you can capture the thickness as well using simple lines across the body like this. We can also draw just halfway. We don't have to draw the entire thing. Remember, keep it simple. Okay, you can also add little lines like this to show the texture, to show some simple lines, to show the direction of how it curves. So all this will help us to visualize the shape and the texture a lot. And these are the 3 easy steps that you can follow to draw almost any objects very quickly and very easily. And over here, I will show you another example on how I can draw this very simple sliced mushroom by using step 1, step 2, and step 3. So let's start off with step 1. I will draw the main outline of the shape. So step 1, I want to capture the lines as detailed as possible. And for step 2, I will use Width tool to decide which part should be thicker. So since I can see this part of the mushroom more and it's closer to me, I will make this part thicker. And same over here. Since it's closer to the camera, I'll make this part thicker like this. And then I'll apply a white color fill. This part, it barely has any lines. So what I can do is, I'll select this shape and I'll just make this line thinner. Something like this. And now I can proceed to step number 3. I will want to capture the thickness, the details, the black pepper bits, and also the lines to show the details. So let's start with the thickness of the mushroom. I will draw a very simple line along the side and edge, along the edge of the mushroom. And then I'll select this line and apply a hairline with profile. And here's a tip. Always make sure that the details that you draw has a thinner outline compared to your main outline that you draw in step number 1. Alright, and at this point, as you can see, every time when I try to draw a new line, my line would go back to the default shape. So I can go to Window, Appearance, and make sure I untick this setting. And before I draw my next line, and let's say I want to reuse this shape, what I can do is I can left click on this shape, press P for pen tool, and whenever I start to draw again, I will get the exact same shape of my line. And now to capture all these little details, we can simplify them. Instead of drawing the whole thing, we can draw it halfway like this using this kind of shape. And since we know that there are a lot of this kind of texture on the mushroom, we can randomly draw the shape and put them over the place. We can even draw a black color fill for some of the darker parts. And over here, I want to show that there's a curved shape over here because without the lines, this mushroom will look as if it's a flat piece of paper. So we want to show that there's some sort of line going on here. So what I can do is I can draw some simple lines like this just to show that there is some direction, some form on the shape. So every little lines like this will help a lot in showing the texture and the details of our object. So once you have captured everything, you will get something that look like this. And to conclude this lesson, let me do a quick recap on what you should do and what you shouldn't do. So step number 1, and make sure that you draw each part separately so that you can adjust the thickness in step 2 more easily. And for step number 2, try to make the side of the object that looks closer to the camera thicker and further away from camera slightly thinner, but not way too thin until that the line disappears, especially for the main outline, or else you will create a very weak silhouette when you have more objects cluttered together. So again, step 2, we need to create a solid and contrast silhouette. And for step 3, for the details, remember that details should always be thinner than the silhouette from step 1, and always use simple lines to capture the details. So try not to capture everything that you see, but instead try to understand what you are drawing and how you can simplify the lines to show the 3D shape, the forms, the texture, and the thickness.